All right, Shabbos say good morning, good morning. Let us begin. We'll begin with the dedications. That's the Merit Hashem. We could begin this share in time. I apologize. I had a... All right, good. Thank you for accommodating the last minute change. Shabbos, our share this morning is dedicated by our Talmud Torah sponsors. We thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Nisan. To thank Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the Shirman Drushos this month in memory of Paul's parents, Shmuel ben Zechariah and Sarah bas Avram. To thank Avram and Shandi Kelman for dedicating the Shiurim this month in memory of Avram's mother, Sarah Braina Bas Yoshua Heschel. To thank our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, Bob Imas in commemoration of the yahrzeit of his father, Jack Imas Yaakov ben Ruvain, and Jacob and Julie Blumenfeld for dedicating the shir today in commemoration of the yahrzeit of Julie's maternal grandmother, Rosalie Gelman, Rivka Rachel Bas Elazar. We hope in the merit of and in the schus of a refuah shalima for Liba Blima Bas Manya. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in the Nechama, all of those who require refuah should have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. And of course, we thank all of our precious mishpachos for their generosity and dedication. And also with that, let us begin. We have a beautiful, beautiful daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Daf Chaf 20. And we are picking up a Meretz Hashem on Yud Tes Amud Beis 19b. And we left off, actually, let's go ahead and pick up 2, 4, 6 lines up from the bottom. So if you remember again, in yesterday's daf, we were focusing on the really interesting question about the order, right? What is the proper order ultimately, again, in the Sota process? Is it mincha before drinking, or is it drinking before mincha? Machlokes between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Shimon. Suppose if you remember again, we had a statement of Rabbi Akiva, which seemed to be inherently contradictory as well. So the Gemara says, "Well, tamech tikshilach gufa mishikaraf hakometz in yechol lachzerba falo beduka v'omedes." So we'll say this was the contradiction we ended off with yesterday, to which the Gemara says, "Lo kasha hadika hadraba machmas resicha v'hadika hadraba machas briusa." We'll say if you remember again, Rabbi Akiva himself seemed to indicate, he had this school of thought that said that once the Parashat Sota was erased, ultimately again, so she cannot retract anymore. Right? She has to go ahead and drink the water. So remember again, Rabbi Akiva said, no, that's absolutely not necessary. Why? Because at the end of the day, she's a beduka hiva omedes. Obviously, again, she's quote unquote checked. Why is she quote unquote checked? Because the Maisa, if she's not willing to drink, what is that indicative of? That's clearly indicative of her guilt, right? That at the end of the day, clearly she doesn't want to drink. It means that Allah Maisa, again, she's clearly guilty, and therefore, what's the point of making her drink? She's checked. To which the Gemara now gives an interesting distinction. Why is she backtracking? So the Gemara says there's two different possibilities. This is what we really ended off with yesterday. The Gemara says one case is talking about where she's retracting based on fear, that's Risichasa, and one is Machmas Briusa. Briusa means like she's strident in the tone that she's taking. And I will say, now, what's this distinction? So if you take a quick look at Rashi says something quite interesting over here. Hadiga Hadra Machmas Briusa. Rashi says, Hadik Tani Beduka Va'omedes, Tika Hadra Ba Machmas Briusa. When Rabbi Akiva says that if she what's the right word? Backtracks, right? She backtracks and she no longer wants to drink. When is that an indication of guilt? When halacha l'maisa she is striking a strident tone. Sheina rosasas, she's not afraid. The kamra ini shalsa, and she's listen, I'm not drinking. I will say, what is that indicative of? Vadai timeahi ulakach ina rosasas tesamcha meikara va'amra ki matina lemishti lo shasina v'lo shna krava komes lo shna lo krava komes lo shasya. So Rabbi Akiva's position is like this. When she goes ahead and she just simply says in a cool and collected fashion, I'm not drinking, that's the indication of guilt. What that shows us is, essentially, she had no intention of drinking, she was just delaying, she clearly knows that she's guilty, and therefore, Allah Lamaisa, whether we offered up her mincha, didn't offer up her mincha, doesn't make a difference. Lamaisa, again, if she said she's not drinking, and again, she's strident and cool, calm, and collected in that statement, that's an admission of guilt. And once that happens, there's absolutely no point in making her drink. He goes on, skip a little bit. Good. V'hadimafli bein karva lo karov dikahadrba machmas risasa. We'll say, so when we make a distinction as to whether or not the karban mincha was offered, this is if she's recanting, right? She's retracted, she doesn't want to drink, but it's clear that she's scared. She's scared. Sha'anu roin osa rosesas, de'ika lameimar de'ina ma'amene shalo yiddaku ha'mayim, va'afilu yitahora, v'rotzai selismoch al tarasa v'lishtos, u'lefichach hi rosesas, u'kishemagas lishtos chozeres, but so we'll listen to this. If on the other hand we see that she's scared, you see that she's scared, right? Literally, again, she's shaking. Shabbos said this is not an indication of guilt. This is an indication of fear. Of fear. So obviously, you can understand what I'll say, that again, a woman could be filled with fear and trepidation, even if she knows of her own innocence. So in that kind of case, it depends. If ultimately, again, the mincha is already offered according to this approach, then halacha l'maisa, we would make her drink. In that case, we'd make her drink. If the mincha was not offered, then halacha l'maisa, we would not make a drink. Now, I will say, I want to be a little bit anticlimactic, because remember again, we've already established the Rambam paskins like the Rabbanon, namely, you drink before mincha. You drink before mincha. So remember again, this is all going in a different school of thought, but either way, even without that, we could apply this entire discussion to the erasure of the parchment. So the Gemara making a fundamental distinction over here between a woman who refuses to drink, striking a strident tone, in which case that's an admission of guilt, versus a woman who goes ahead and refuses to drink because of fear. That often is not an admission of guilt, it's just her understandable nervousness about this process. To which the Gemara Svachi cover, this is what it means to say, Kal machmas priusa klal lo shasya, whenever a woman is striking a strident tone, or like a more cool, calm, and collected tone. And therefore, again, halacha l'maisa, whether the mincha was offered, wasn't offered, we don't make her drink, because that's an admission of guilt. Machmas risasa, but if she's just scared, ad shelo karava kometz, if the mincha has not yet been offered, dakatilo emchok megillah, which means that ultimately, again, the parchment has not been erased. Inami emchok megillah d'shelo kidin avid kohanim demachki, or for that matter, even if it was erased, but the kohanim erased it prematurely, matzah hadraba, then she can go ahead and refuse to drink. Mishekarav hakometz. But ultimately, again, once the karban mincha has been offered, the bedin avid kohanim demachki, that the kohanim acted appropriately in that they erased the parchment, then lo matzi hadraba, then she can no longer go ahead and refuse to drink. Says the Gemara, Kasha de Rabbi Akiva ad Rabbi Akiva. I will say the problem over here is that halacha l'maisa, we now have an inherent contradiction in Rabbi Akiva. How so? We'll say top line on Chaf Amud Aleph 20a, Hasam Amar Mechika Ma'akva, Vahacha Amar Kometz Ma'akev. So I will say, there are two different positions of Rabbi Akiva. In one position, Rabbi Akiva is saying that once the kometz is offered, she has to drink. And then in this second version of Rabbi Akiva, we're saying it's not about the offering of the kometz, but rather what is it about? The erasure of the parsha. So which one is it? To which the Gemara says, Trei Tanoi, Valibud Rabbi Akiva. Ultimately, I will say, Halacha l'maisa, two different opinions according to Rabbi Akiva. Fine. Now I will say, again, just to reinforce, so we already know that we saw that the Rambam Paskin, again, we saw this in yesterday, Hilchos Sota, Perek Gimel Halacha Tesvav, the Achar Kach Mashke Osa, the Achar Shetishte Lokeach Kli Shari Shabo Mincha. So I'll say we Paskin like the Rabbanon, that ultimately, again, you drink first, and then ultimately, again, offer mincha afterwards. Now, again, therefore, for us, the big determinant is going to be whether or not the parchment was erased. Again, and we'll talk about this in greater depth. Before the parchment was erased, she has the ability, obviously, to back out. After the parchment is erased, ultimately, again, we'll discuss. Good. Also, the Gemara is off with an interesting question. Ibailahu Amra Eini Shosa Machzmers Priyusa. Listen to this. The Chazara Amar Shosa Ani Mahu. Now let's say, watch this. Let's say the following situation. She says, I'm not drinking. But she says, I'm not drinking in a strident tone. Normally, again, if she strikes a strident tone, what does that tell us? Guilt. Let's say then she says she backtracks on the backtrack. She backs on the back, right? So again, she's in the process. Then she says, I'm not drinking. Right? I'm a conscientious objector. Right? I'm not drinking. And then she says, no, I'll drink. So I say, what do we do in a situation like this? Mao, Kevan Damrani Show said to me, Anika Amra, the came with the Aksik Nafsha with Tuma, Lamasi Hadraba. So I don't want to do we say like this. Well, look, she said, I'm not drinking. Right? And she struck a strident tone. And I will say, what's the halacha when you strike a strident tone, according to what we just said before? What is that effectively doing? It's an admission of guilt. Well, once a woman says to me, and I will say, let's play this a little bit differently. Let's say a woman was in the basement for the Sota process, and she said, Tamea Ani. And then she said, you know what? I'm sorry. I realized I had a wrong recollection of the event. I was thinking of a different marriage. Right? Actually, in this one, right, I actually didn't do anything wrong. So Rabbi said, would we let her drink in such a situation like that? No way. In other words, once a woman says Tamea Ani, that's it. We're done here. So the shaila is striking the strident tone effectively the same thing as saying Tamea Ani, and therefore she can't backtrack. Oh, Dilma, Kevan da Amra Shosani, Gal Yadaita Demach must be Susahu da Amra. Or do we say no? Since she backtracked on the backtrack, and now she said what? I'll drink. But I will say, listen to this. Maybe, you see, the whole distinction we've been making this entire time, right, is that when she strikes a strident tone, that's an admission of guilt. Versus when a person is fearful, right, that manifests itself differently. Rabbi say the truth is, fear could manifest itself differently. Some people could look confident even when they're actually fearful. So maybe in reality, even though she looked strident, and even though a strident tone normally means what? Admission of guilt. Maybe this just, we'll say, like some people laugh when they get nervous, right? Or even laugh, and you see, it's an interesting thing, right? Even some people, like when dealing with like heavy stuff, they'll just have a conversation with something like this. Like if we talk about something tragic, and somebody will laugh, and it's not because they're callous or insensitive. It's just how they deal with. It's just whatever. I'm sure there's a psychology behind it, right? But let me say, it's how they deal with a heavy situation. So maybe over here, same idea. Maybe halacha l'maisa again. Her strident tone is not an admission of guilt. This is just how she deals with difficult situations. To which the Gemara says, teku. So the Gemara says, I'm not sure how to deal with that one. That one, Eliyahu is going to have to take care of. We're not sure. Last piece I'll say, I'm going to avoid the Shmuel. Interesting case. I will say, in the waters, you have to place something bitter into the waters even before the parchment is erased in the waters. My taima, or I should say before she drinks. My taima, tamarmar mehamorim shemarim kvar. I will say, this is actually very interesting. That lemaisa is before the parchment gets erased. The Torah calls, if you look at Rashi, shemarim kvar, kodem mechika, Alma machmas davar acher heim marim ve'im maririm al shem klalos b'dikasam nigras. Well, it's very interesting. Up until this Gemara, we always thought the reason they're called the bitter waters is why? Because of the effect that they have on the woman in the event that she's guilty. It turns out, says the Gemara, they're called bitter waters because they're supposed to taste bitter. And therefore, again, the Gemara says you're supposed to put something, davar mar, you're supposed to put something in the waters that makes them taste bitter, even before the parchment itself is erased in the water. Incredible. Good. Now we'll say Mishnah. Let's go weiter in the process. Ad shlo nimcha ka megillah amra eini shosa. So we'll say, now we come to a very interesting case. Halacha l'maisa, we'll call her Rachel, right? Rachel's married to Ruvain. They go through the whole Sota process. Rachel's in the Beis HaMikdash. They're right about to erase the parchment. And she says, Eini shosa. I'm not drinking. Now we'll say, before the erasure, whether she says, I'm not drinking, either because A, she strikes a strident tone, or because she's fearful, if she says, I'm not drinking, then what? Stop. We just shut down the process. So we'll say, what do you do? Megillah. So we'll say, now, the Mishnah is talking about a case where the parchment was already written, but it wasn't erased. It was already written, but it wasn't erased. So what do you do in a situation like this? Megillasa nignezes. So we'll say, it's fascinating. We put her Megillah essentially in Shemus. Right? So there was a Shemus. We've actually learned this before in Maseches Yuma. There was a Shemus chamber, actually right off Shar Nikanor. which we'll discuss, right? There was a shameless chamber, and we would put this Parsha Sota in the shameless chamber. Look at Rashi. Megillah Nignezes, B'tzidei HaHeichal, in one of the corners of the Beis HaMikdash, T'chol Kisei HaKodesh She'inon Ru'uyin Likros Bahen Nignazin Shelo Yisbazu. So we'll say pretty incredible Gemara, so pretty incredible Rashi, right? And Allah said there was a chamber in the Beis HaMikdash where they kept shameless. And I will say, understand, remember, you can't use this parchment for someone else, right? Why can't you use the parchment? Why not? Because remember again, Lishma. So you can't use it for someone else. So they would go out and they would put it away. Okay, fine. So uminchasa misparezes al hadeshen. Now, I will say, interestingly enough, her mincha, this is presupposing that her karban mincha, now again, has not been offered, but is ready to go. So what do you do with the karban mincha? It's scattered on the ashes, right, on the ash heap, on the deshen. Ve'ein migilasek ksher lahashkos v'sot achares. You cannot use her parsha, her parchment, to go ahead and use for another sota. What as we saw before, the kas of law, right, or law lishma. Okay, well, says that's part one. So, right, case one is where she says Eini Shosa prior to the erasure of the Megillah. So essentially, halacha l'maisa one, we take her parchment, put it in shemis. Number two, her mincha is scattered on the ash heap. Fine. Nimchaka Megillah va'amra tmeani. All right, so we'll say, so now case two, Megillah was erased, right? Or the white parchment was erased in the water. They both say, now again, remember, we were talking about before, and we were saying, she says, Eini Shosa, I'm not drinking. So they were making an interesting distinction. Is she saying, I'm not drinking out of fear, striking a strident tone? We'll say this case is different. Here, the parchment was erased. Va'amra tmeani. She admits her guilt. Now, listen, obviously, after she admits her guilt, there's no need to make her drink the water. Right? In other words, now it happens to be over here, the parchment was already erased, but she went ahead and she admitted her guilt. Ultimately, again, we pour out the water. They will say, and we scatter her mincha on the ash heap. Okay, so we'll say that's case two. Right, case two, parchment erased. She says tamea ani. Once again, shut down the process. Nimcha kar Megillah. Case three, same case, parchment was erased. The Amra, Eini Shosa. Now we'll say, now she says, case number three is parchment was erased, and what does she say? I'm not drinking. So we'll say, so now in this case, Ma'arin Osa, Umashkin Osa Bal Karcha. So we'll say, in this case, we force her. Now remember again, we saw this in yesterday's Mishnah. How do we force her? By the way, I got a Musar text from the dental lobby yesterday after the thing. It's not a torture device, Dr. Milner. What is it called? What? Bite block. Right. And I said, dentists clearly need a little bit more imagination. By the way, bite block is actually not that much better than torture device. But okay, but that's fine. In any event. Fine, bite block. Oh, much better, right? We put in the bite block. Good. So let's say, so ma'arin osa, umashkin osa bal karcha. And ultimately, again, we force her to drink. So we'll say again, we'll define the parameters of that as well. So we'll say, so now, just want to point out three different cases over here, right? So case number one is, she says, I'm not drinking before the parchment is erased. Okay, so look. If she says no to the process, that shuts the process down. That's it. Right? That's case one. Case two, parchment was erased. She says, Timea ani. Right? I commit adultery. Okay? Also, shuts everything down. We're not going to make her drink because she's admitted her guilt. Case three, parchment has been erased. She says, I'm not drinking. Right? The Rose says, distinction between saying, Timea ani, and I'm not drinking. So in this case, I'm not drinking. Well, again, the parchment has been erased. Yes, you are. Now, we'll discuss the parameters of that as well as whether or not we adopt this previous distinction of, is she saying I'm not drinking in a strident tone, in a fearful tone? We'll talk about that as well. Good. Now the Mishnah transitions to talk about the effects of the water. So we'll say, once she ingests the water, if indeed she's guilty, right? She doesn't even finish drinking the water before the water has the effect on her. Literally, again, her face, right? She begins to become pale. So her eyes begin to bulge. Malas gidin, and literally again her veins begin to protrude. They would begin to say, they being the Kohanim, Hotziuha shalotetame ha'azara. Quick, remove her, so that she does not make the azara impure. Rashi says over here, shalotetame ha'azara. Just to orient, where is everything happening for the sota? So remember again, it's happening by Shar Nikanor. Remember again, she's not actually entering into the actual courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash itself. She's in the Ezras Nashim, right? The general courtyard. She's on the steps by Shar Nikanor. So Rashi says over here, Shalatatami Azara, Shari Nikanor, O Ezras Nashim, Sheteitze Derech Sham. So both say, so remember, and they say, because it looks like she's about to die, they say, quick, take her out before she goes ahead and makes and essentially becomes a source of tumah inside of the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash. Im yesh la schos was very interesting. If she has some type of merit, we'll discuss that. If she has some type of merit, haisatolala. Sometimes we'll say a merit, a personal merit that she has could delay the effects of the water. So yesh schos tola shana achas. Yesh chos tola beishanim, yesh chos tola gimel shanim. They both say different merits have different effects. You could have a merit that delays the effect of the water for a year, for 2 years, for 3 years. Mikan Omer ben Azai, both say from here ben Azai taught, Chayiv Adam lelamed esbito Torah. A man is obligated to teach his daughter Torah. They both say, now this is fascinating. Why is a man obligated to teach his daughter Torah? Why? Shim tishta. So what's fascinating? Because if it turns out, chas v'shalom, that she is ever a sota, that she should know that a schus, a merit, a personal merit, could delay the effects of the water. And I both say, what does this mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi says over here, Teida sheschus tolala, tira v'telame beparsha sota, sheschus tola, diafina me v'niksa v'nizra zera, v'niksa aidi zchuyot k'dei zria zera. Listen to this. It seems to be, although we'll further define what Ben Azai is saying is like this, that chas v'shalom, if a woman is a sota, let's say Abba says she drinks the water, and it has no effect on her. But she knows she committed adultery. So she can erroneously emerge with the idea that what? The waters don't work. Meanwhile, it could very well be that the waters will work, but they're having a delayed effect on her. Why are they having a delayed effect on her? Why? Because of some schus that she possesses. Therefore, Ben Azai says, a man should really teach his daughter Torah, so that she understands how things work. So chas v'shalom, in the event that she becomes a sota, chas v'shalom in her lifetime, it shouldn't cast aspersions on the sota waters, but she should understand that the reason it's not having an immediate effect must be because of some type of schus that she has. So therefore, Ben Azai advocates for a man teaching his daughter Torah so that it should never come to cast aspersions on the sota waters. Should she become a sota chas v'shalom and it doesn't immediately work, she should realize it's not because the water is not working, but rather because she has some type of schus. Which on a deeper level also means that Azai is saying, teach your daughter Torah, even though there may be no biblical obligation to teach a girl Torah, because the Gemara says you have to teach your sons. That seems to be the biblical obligation. But a man should teach his daughter Torah so that she should know how things in Yiddishkeit work. She should know how things work. He's giving a dramatic example over here about sota, but she should know how things work. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Kalamalami Bito Torah, Kilalom the Tiflos. This is a pretty strong statement that we'll have to see what's happening over here. Lemaisa, again, literally translated, a man who teaches his daughter Torah is like he teaches her tiflos. Now I will say tiflos, could sometimes even have a connotation of immorality. So obviously, again, we'll see in the Gemara what is going on over here. Like what could be bad about teaching one's daughter Torah? But Rabbi Eliezer clearly seems to have an aversion to this. He says it actually could have a negative effect. Rabbi Yeshua says, so we'll say again, we'll see what that machlokes is. Rabbi Yoshua Omer, Rotzi Isha bekav tiflus mites kaben miprishos. Rabbi Yeshua says a woman would rather have, we'll say literally it means a kav and intimacy than 9 kavim and separation. Meaning that a woman would rather have less material wealth, but a greater level of physical connection with her husband than more material wealth and physical separation from her husband. In other words, we'll say what Rabbi Yeshua seems to be saying over here. Again, we'll see all this in the Gemara that for a woman, so having a physical connection, lav dafka actual like bia, but a sense of physical intimacy, a physical closeness with her husband is more important than material wealth in the home. Okay, we'll have further details on that. So the Gemara says as follows. Furthermore, I used to say, Chasid Sholta, Rasha Arum, Isha Prusha, Umakas Prushim, Hare Elam Avali Olam. So as furthermore, Rabbi used to say, the following things literally destroy the world. A Chasid Shota, let's say Chasid Shota is a pious fool. A pious fool. This means a person who goes about avenues or going down avenues of piety that are just foolish. They're not actual piety, they're foolishness. But because he's a fool, he thinks ultimately again that it's piety. Rasha Arum means a cunning Rasha. Isha Prusha, an ascetic woman. Makas Prushin, lashes that ascetic people give themselves. Again, I will say we'll define each of these categories. Hara Elam Avalan. These are all things that destroy the world. As well say, obviously, a lot to unpack in this Mishnah. Let's begin to analyze. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Rabbi Meir. Let's listen to this. It's incredible Gemara. Kishayisi lamatora etzer Rabbi Akiva. So this is Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Shmuel, who said in the name of Rabbi Meir. When I was learning Torah by Rabbi Akiva, Hayisi matel kan konsum l'soch hadio v'lo amar li davar. I used to go out and put kan konsum. I both say, we learned kan konsum on Shabbos daf. Kan konsum is a type of dye additive that makes the dye permanent. So Rabbi Meir was saying, I was a scribe, I was a sofer, and I used to add kan konsum into the ink, and Rabbi Akiva never said anything to me. Okay, Shabbos it's Rabbi Yishmael. Then when I came to Rabbi Yishmael, Amar li b'ni ma malachtecha. He said to me, Rabbi Yishmael said to me, my son, what's your profession? Amarti lo lavlar ani. I said to him, I'm a scribe. Amar li b'ni havizer shemalachtecha malach hashamayim. My son, know that you're doing the Lord's work. You are doing the Lord's work. Why? Shema tachsir os achos. Otasir, or taxir os achos, nim says atamachrin eskala olab kulo. Because if you add in one letter, or you go ahead and take away one letter, or change one letter, literally you could destroy the word. In other words, I will say, the way it works with Torah is that one letter could change the entire meaning of a pasuk. I will say Rashi gives examples. For example, the pasuk says Hashem Elokim Emes, right? Hashem is the truthful God, true God. I will say Chas v'Shalom, you leave off the aleph of Emes. What do you have? Hashem Elokim Meis, Chas v'Shalom, right? Or Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokim Hashem Echad, right? Change the aleph from a dalet, and what do you have? Hashem, right? Hashem Elokeinu Acher. Someone, in other words, so Rabbi Shlomo was saying to Rabbi Meir, be careful. Because you write literally again one change, either one omission, one addition, one change. Chas v'Shalom. This Amarti lo. I said to him, Rebbe, don't worry. Davar echad yesh li shani matel so chadio. I have this thing that I add into the dye. The kan konsum shmo, and it's called kan konsum, and that makes sure ultimately again no erasures, no changes, nothing. Amar li v'chi matilin kan konsum so chadio. Are you allowed to add kan konsum into ink? HaTorah amra umacha. The Torah says, I will say, by Parsha Sota, has to be erased. Ksav sheyachol limchos. Ultimately, again, means you have to use writing that can be erased. I will say, let me give you coming attractions over here, because Rashi already points it out. We are going to see something amazing. Rabbi Shmuel is of the opinion, I will say, that watch this. If you have a Sota, you could take out a Sefer Torah, take out Parsha Sota from the Sefer Torah and use that to erase. Wild. Again, we'll talk about it on the base. So Rabbi Shmuel says, therefore, the Torah itself has to be written in a way that can be erased. Rabbi say, it's not clear, does Rabbi Shmuel hold, therefore, just Parsha Sota in the Torah has to be written that way? Or maybe what? Maybe the entire Torah has to be written that way. So that will, but in any event, Rabbi Shmuel clearly has an objection to the use of kan konsum to the use of kan consum. To which the Gemara says, "My kamalei, my kamahadle." So we'll say, what exactly is this exchange over here? Sali kamalei. So we'll say, this is what he means to say. Lomi boy bechaseros yisiros the baki ana. Rabbi Meir was saying like this, Rabbi, don't worry. When it comes to ultimately, again, what letters should be added, what letters should not be added, I know, I got this. I got this. What's the first wide line? Elafi lemechash lezvov. The dilma asi v'asev atagi the dalid. Umachik le'umashi le'reish. But maybe you'd be concerned that maybe a fly is going to come and sit. Remember again, a dalid has a little shmichik that comes up. That's the technical term, right? The shmichik that comes up on the top left, right? On the top left. And also remember again, on the top right. It extends past the leg. Maybe you'd be afraid that a fly is going to come along, sit on the shmichik of the dalid, and make it into a reish. Make it into a reish. To which the Gemara says, to that, Rabbi Eliezer says, don't worry about it. Yes, davar echad yeshli, shani matil, shani, see, it's funny, I read that davar echad. Really, it's davar echad, right? So davar echad yeshli, shani matil, so chadio, the kan consum shmo. I've got this thing. It's called kan consum. Put it in, and the moment you write, what effectively happens? The ink dries. The ink dries. So the Gemara says, "Ini, is that so?" V'ham, Rabbi says, "That's true that Rabbi Meir used to put in kan consum." V'atanya, I'm Rabbi Meir. K'shayisi lamatora it's Rabbi Yishmael. When I used to learn Torah by Rabbi Yishmael, hayisi matel kan consum l'so chadio. I used to put kan consum into the ink. V'lo amrli davar, and Rabbi Yishmael never said anything to me. Ukeshabasi it's Rabbi Akiva asralai. Then it came to Rabbi Akiva said I can't do it. So we'll say, so now, this is totally the opposite story. So kasha shimush ashimush, kasha asra asra. So we'll say now the stories are contradictory. In story number 1, Rabbi Meir started by Rabbi Akiva, put kan consum in the dio, and Rabbi Akiva never said anything. He comes to Rabbi Shmuel says, what are you doing? In story number 2, he starts at Rabbi Shmuel says, he put kan consum to the dio. Rabbi Shmuel never said anything. He came to Rabbi Akiva, and Rabbi Akiva says something. So what's going on over here? So Bishlam Shimush Hashimush Lokasha. So I will say, from the perspective of who he's learning by, that's not a contradiction. Why I will say is incredible. Meikara Asalakamed Rabbi Akiva. In the beginning, he in fact used to learn by Rabbi Akiva. Okay, I will say, so why did he leave Rabbi Akiva? Kevan de Lomatzi Kam Alibe Asalakamed Rabbi Shmuel. The Gemara. Supposed to listen to this. Originally, Rabbi Meir learned by Rabbi Akiva. And then he left. Why? Rabbi say because he could not get concrete hadracha, concrete guys. Rabbi Akiva was such an outstanding Talmid Chacham that Rabbi Akiva could argue either side of an argument, right, conclusively. So Rabbi say, as a student, Rabbi say, remember again, when you're learning, person starting learning, what do you need? You need to accumulate a body of information, facts, right? Facts. Kasher treif, tameh tahar, mutter aser. So Rabbi Meir is learning by Rabbi Akiva, and he can't get clear, like, what does Rabbi Akiva hold? It was like, by the way, it's such an incredible, so forget, right? He couldn't get clear what Rabbi Akiva held, because Rabbi Akiva was able to see all different sides and able to argue all different sides so conclusively. So he's like, I don't have a solid body of knowledge with which to operate with. So Rabbi say, what does he do? He goes to Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel was much more concrete in his thinking. So he amassed a body of concrete thoughts to Rabbi Shmuel. And then what Rabbi say? And then what? Then he goes back to Rabbi Akiva. Right? He goes back to Rabbi Akiva to learn svara, to see different sides of the opinion. I just point out something amazing. It's an incredible yisod also in parenting. Right? I will say, in parenting and raising our children, one of the most important things we have to do is to convey a concrete, precise hashkafas hachayim. I would say sometimes as adults, often I will say, how do we lead our lives? If we're honest, we are like a series of inherent contradictions. Right? I believe one thing, sometimes I act a different way. That's kind of what part of being alive is. But yet, in the chinuch I convey to my children, I have to really try to be consistent, right? This is what we believe. This is what we do. This is how we live, and I have to model a life of consistency. Because l'maisa, again, if my children get competing and sometimes even contradictory messages from me, it's so hard for them to know. So what do we do? Is this okay? Is this not okay? Right? We do this at home. We do this on vacation. Right? We do this the way what do we do? What is our hashkafa? What is our approach? What is our mahalach? Now, I will say, as our kids get older, do they realize that ultimately, again, life is complex, and sometimes a person doesn't necessarily operate with one set of ideas. Yeah, but that's a lesson that we all learn as we grow up. But when our children are young, especially in their formative years, it is so important to get a clear and consistent hashkafa from one's parents. That's Rabbi Akiva versus Rabbi Yishmael. You gotta start out life like a Rabbi Yishmael. Here's what we do, here's how we do it, here's how we practice, here's how we live, here's what we believe. Here's the clear, consistent hashkafas hachayim. This is what we are, this is who we are. Do they realize again, like Rabbi Yishmael, like later on in life, that maybe there are different approaches, sure, absolutely, but not in youth. Not in youth. Youth requires clear, consistent, ongoing messaging. Good. In any event, the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, Ela asar kasha. So now I understand. I will say it's not a contradiction who Rabbi Meir learned by. He started at Rabbi Akiva, couldn't get clear, consistent messaging, went to Rabbi Yishmael, got a body of knowledge, and then went back to Rabbi Akiva. Fine. I will say, but we have another question. What's the other question? Asra. Right? In the first version, Rabbi Akiva was okay with kan consum. Rabbi Yishmael was not. Second version, Rabbi Yishmael was okay with. Rabbi Akiva was not. So to which the Gemara says, Ela asra asra kasha. Yeah, that's a contradiction. So we'll say, the Gemara just says, it's a contradiction, I don't know what to do with it. So Tanya, Rabbi Yehuda says, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Rabbi Meir used to say, Lakol matilin kan consum l'sochtio. In general, you could always add in kan consum into ink. Chutz, we'll say, Amud Beis, chutz mi parshas sota bilvad. We'll say, with the exception of parshas sota. Parshas sota, now we'll say, Rashi points out over here, afilu b'sefer Torah. Right, so you could write an entire Torah with kan consum, but you can't use kan consum in the section of sota. Rabbi Yaakov or Mishmo, chutz mi parsha sota shal mikdash. Rabbi Yaakov says, no. You could use kan consum for everything in a Sefer Torah. The only thing you can't use kan consum for is what? Is parsha sota that they write in the Beis Hamikdash. So what's the Ma'benayu? I will say, so what's the machlokes? Here's incredible. Amr Yirmiyah, limchok la min haTorah ika beinayu. Watch this. So you know what the machlokes is? The machlokes is, watch this. Can you take out Parsha Sota from a Sefer Torah, and use that for the Sota in the Beis Hamikdash? I will say, so therefore, Rabbi Yaakov says no. Therefore, because you can't use Parsha Sota in a Sefer Torah can be written with kan consum. On the other hand, Rabbi Meir said, yes, you can. And therefore, Rabbi Meir says that halacha l'maaseh, even Parsha Sota in a Sefer Torah cannot be written with kan consum. V'hani tanai kani tanai. So we'll say, this time I like the following tanai. We'll say, Chaf Amud Beis 2, 4, 5 lines down. The Sanya. Ein Megillah seksher lahashkos basot acheres. So we'll say, I want to suggest that the machlokes Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yaakov is the same machlokes tanaim over here. Watch this. Why? What do we say? Ultimately, again, when you write the parsha sota for a particular sota, you cannot use that for another sota. Right? Sota acheres. Rabbi Achi bar Yoshia Omer Megillah seksher lahashkos sota acheres. Rabbi Achi Yoshia says, yes, you can. Wow. Yes, you can. Shabbos says, the Gemara wants to suggest as follows. Maybe these machlokesim are aligned. Namely, the opinion that says that you could even use Parsha Sota from a Sefer Torah would also agree that what? The Parsha you wrote for one Sota can be used for what? Another Sota. And the opinion that says that you cannot use the Parsha from a Sefer Torah would say that you cannot use a Parsha written for one Sota for another Sota. To which the Gemara says, no, Amra Papa Dilma Lohi. You can't, they don't necessarily align. How so? Ad kamo kamatana kama hasam elakevan de intik l'shum rachel lo hadra mintika l'shum leah. Both said the opinion that says that once a parsha sota was written for one sota, it can't be used for someone else. That makes sense. Because once something is written for Rachel, it can't be used for Leah. Aval Torah, tistama ksiva, hachanavi de bechakinan. But lamaisa again, lamaisa, maybe a parsha of Sota and Sefer Torah, which is not written for anyone. They both say now essentially if it's not written for anyone, then who is it written for? Everyone. Maybe can be used. So to which the Gemara says, Amra Nachar Bar Yitzchak Dimalohi Ad Kan Lo Ka'amar Rabbi Achi Bar Yoshia Hasam Ela B'Megillah De'ichtav L'Shum Alos Ba'olam. Rabbi said furthermore, Rabbi Achi Bar Yoshia said that Alocha L'Maisa, when it's written ultimately again in the Beis HaMikdash, it's written in general, ultimately again for the sake of sota. So maybe even if it's not used for one sota, it can be used for another sota. However, Aval Torah, less in the Islamic ksiva, but by Torah, which is written ultimately for learning and not for sota, hachet nami dalo mechakinai. Perhaps it should not be used for sota at all. So Shabbos says, "Salacha l'maisa." The one goes Rav Achi Bar Oshia, lest the kasav legarish is ishto v'nimlach u'motzal ben ira v'amalo shmi kishmecha v'shem ishti kishem ishtecha pasal legarish. But I'm saying, Rav say, how does Rav Achi Bar Oshia allow you to use parsha sota written for one sota for another sota? After all, Rav say, what about the parallel case by Gittin? Right? Reuven wants to divorce his wife Rachel, and they're both from Baltimore, and then they reconcile. And then what happens? Great news. I mean, not great news, but there's another Reuven and Rachel from Baltimore who do want to get divorced. Let's just go ahead and use the same get. Right? Va'amar. I will say, so Reuven number 2 says Reuven number 1, it's a shame to let a good get go to waste. Va'amar lo shmi kishmecha v'shem ishti kishem ishtecha. Right? After all, again, I'm Reuven. My wife's Rachel. We're both from Baltimore. So let me use the get. I will say, what's the halacha? It doesn't work. Pasal garishbo. So I will say again. So I would say the same idea. How can you use a parsha sota written for Rachel and then use it for Leah? Amri Hasan the kasav la'amar achmana, but inan ksiva l'shma. It's different. I will say, why is it different there? Because by get, the Torah used lashon of a kasav law. It has to be mamish be written for her, and over here it's not written for her. Hachanami va'asa law. I will say ultimately again by sota. It says you have to make it for her, which I will say also sounds like parsha sota. That's the reading for the particular woman. To which the Gemara says no. Maya siya. I will say, what does it mean? It says va'asala. What does that mean? Mechika. I will say, remember again, we saw this machlokes earlier. Rav Achi Bar Oshia will say that the lishma component of sota means it has to be erased for this particular woman. So apparently Rav Achi Bar Oshia holds, when it comes to writing, you could even use parsha sota written for one woman and use it for another woman. What's the part of the process that has to be lishma? Mechika. The erasure has to be lishma. I will say, just I'll point out, how do we paskin? We paskin that parsha sota has to be written for a particular woman. That's how we paskin. We need ksiva l'shma and mechika l'shma, which by extension means that you cannot use a section. You cannot take out parsha sota from the Sefer Torah and use that for the actual sota process, because again, parsha sota in the Sefer Torah was not written l'shma for this particular woman. I will say incredible. Let's go weiter. So I'll say, so remember again, halacha l'maisa, the Mishnah said that the sota waters would begin to have an effect on her almost instantaneously. So the Gemara says, money, Rabbi Shimon, whose opinion is reflected in the Mishnah? It's Rabbi Shimon. The Amar, makriv es minchasa, the achar kach mashke. Rabbi say, because Rabbi Shimon, remember again, Rabbi say, it's Rabbi Shimon from the previous Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon said, mincha before drinking. So the kama de lo karva minchasa lo batki la maya. As long as the mincha was not offered, the waters would not work. Waters would not checker. Dichsev, minchas zikaron maskeres avon. I have Shabbos say, so therefore again, the first part of the Mishnah seems to reflect the view of Rabbi Shimon. Ema Seifa, look at the end of the Mishnah. Yesh la zchos, haisa tolova. I'll say if she had some type of personal merit could delay the impact of the water. Asan Rabbanon. So Shabbos say this reflects the view of the Rabbanon. Di Rabbi Shimon ha'amar ein zuchos tola b'mayim hamarim. It was because it was Rabbi Shimon holds the halacha l'maisa azchus. Also, Rabbi Shimon rejects the idea that a personal merit could delay the impact of the water. Amar Rav Chisda hamani Rabbi Akiva. So we'll say, so therefore, we have a problem. The first part of the Mishnah sounds like it's the view of Rabbi Shimon. The second part of the Mishnah reflects the view of the Rabbanon. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda hamani Rabbi Akiva. Whose opinion does the Mishnah reflect? I will say to Rabbi Akiva. The Amar makriv es minchasa. The achakach mashke. Shabbos say Rabbi Akiva, on one hand, is of the opinion, he agrees with Rabbi Shimon, namely, mincha before drinking. Ubischus savar la kirabanan. But Rabbi say in the topic of schus tolala, he holds like the rabbanon. Incredible. So Rabbi say fine. So the technical issue. V'heim omrim l'siyas. Rabbi says, remember again, as the water begins to have its instantaneous effect, they cry out. The Pashas Kohanim are crying out. Take her out of the Beis Hamikdash. Take her out of the Beis Hamikdash in order that she does not die inside of the Azara and create tumah. To which the Gemara says, my time. But what's the reason? The Dilma Mesa. We're concerned she's going to die in the Mikdash. The Memra. The Meis Asra Machana Leviyah. And I will say, this is actually a fascinating discussion. Is this to say that a corpse can't come into Machana Leviyah? And I will say, just a moment. When Klal Yisrael traveled in the desert, there are 3 camps. Right? Rashi points this out. 3 camps. What are the 3 camps? In the middle, you have the Aron. That's called Machane Shechina. Around Machane Shechina, you have, again, what's called Machane Leviyah, the Levium. And then around that, the rest of the Shvatim traveled. That's called Machane Yisrael. So I will say, to a certain degree, so Yerushalayim was set up the same way. The Beis Hamikdash proper, when we say Beis Hamikdash proper, we'll say, that's when you go through Shar Nikanor. Right? When you're in the interior courtyard, right? Where the Mizbeach was and the actual Beis Hamikdash was. That's called Machane Shechina. Right? Now, what we call the courtyard of the Beis Hamikdash, either again, the women's courtyard, Ezras Nashim, or Ezras Yisrael, which is where you entered in, right? And you had the 4 chambers there. That's called Machane Leviyah. Machane Leviyah. And in fact, the rest of the Harabayis is also called Machane Leviyah. Outside of the Harabayis, that's called Machane Yisrael. Now, I will say, in general, the Gemara says that a mace is allowed to be in Machane Leviyah. I will say, where do we know this from? Vatanya, Tamei Meis Mutuli Kanas in Machane Leviyah. V'lo Tamei Meis Bilvat Ela Afilu Meis Atzmo. Even a mace himself is permitted to be a Machane Leviyah. Where do we know this from? Shneimar Vayikach Moshes Asmos Yosef Imo B'mechisaso. Rabbi said, we know this because the remains of Yosef traveled with the Aron, traveled with the ark. Now the truth is, we'll see exactly with the ark, not the ark. The point over here is that Moshe Rabbeinu took the remains of Yosef with him. I will say, we're gonna pick up with this tomorrow. I just want to end off with something amazing, also, which is just the tie into the parasha. I'll just point out, right, this is parasha. The parasha is Tazria Mitzorah. Speak about the Mitzorah, right? So I'll tell you something amazing. Where is the Mitzorah, right? Where is the Mitzorah banished to? Right, where's the Mitzorah banished to? Badad Yetzimi, right? Rashi says, Michutz l'shalosh machanos. The Mitzorah has to leave all 3 camps. So isn't this fascinating? A corpse is allowed to be in Machane Leviyah, right? The Mitzorah has to leave all 3 camps. So you see something absolutely amazing. Remember, we'll talk about this more tomorrow, but Lamaisa, why does a person get saras? One of the reasons, primary reason, Lashon Hara. So you see that someone who speaks Lashon Hara is even worse than a corpse, right? They're more tamei, they're more defiled than a corpse. A corpse which is aviyah vol satuma could remain in Machane Leviyah, the Mitzorah. All right, we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up with this sugya. We'll say incredible Gemara and Agarata. Back to some Sot Agarata tomorrow. We'll say Shkoyach.